Green Street Primary School were holding a race. A fun run, someone called it. It was to be the main event at a fundraising day for Comic Relief. There were going to be all sorts of events and stalls. Face painting, balloon modelling, guess the number of sweets in a jar, and soak the headmaster with a sponge. Everyone was really looking forward to it. Someone suggested that to make the fun run really fun, people could wear fancy dress, but serious runners disagreed. A race was for racing and winning, not messing about. On the day, some people dressed up as rabbits and firemen and wore their red noses for fun, but the real athletes came in running shirts and shorts and running shoes. Super Steve was a serious contender. He'd always been the fastest runner in the school, and today he was determined to win. He'd already looked through several catalogues and decided what he would spend his prize money on. Stanley was taking the race seriously too. Steve always beat him at school, but a lot of people had sponsored him and would give him extra money if he did well, all of which he would give to Comic Relief. He would have liked to send the prize money too, but he knew that Super Steve was bound to win that. Steve did a few stretches and a couple of press-ups for show. He didn't really go in for all this training lark. You didn't have to bother when you were a natural-born athlete after all. He straightened the designer label on his top, tied the lace on his Nike Lunar Eclipse running shoes, and waved to his devoted fans as he strolled to the starting line. Stanley had been carefully training. This would be the longest race he'd ever run, and he wanted to make sure he didn't give up. He jogged on the spot a little, did some stretching exercises to warm up his muscles. He checked to see that the string on his shorts was properly tied. He didn't want them falling down in the middle of the race. Then he jogged nervously to the start. Mr. Barton fired the starting gun. The race had begun. Steve sprinted into the lead. He left the others far behind. He looked back over his shoulder and laughed. He knew he was bound to win, but he never thought it would be this easy. Stanley watched Steve go. He knew he couldn't run that fast, but Mr. Barton had told them to pace themselves, and Stanley knew that his only chance of finishing was if he kept a steady pace. Steve flew past the drink station along the way. There'd be time for drinks after he won. Stanley stopped to take a drink from time to time, and sometimes he grabbed a wet sponge and squeezed it over his head. He knew he needed to keep up his fluid intake, and it made him feel like a professional athlete. Steve was running so fast he could see he was already beginning to lap one of the runners, looking like a rather lame rabbit up ahead. The rabbit limped along and called out to Steve for help. Steve sneered at the rabbit. "Shouldn't race if you can't stand the pace," he muttered to himself as he pushed past on his way. Stanley had begun to steadily overtake several other runners and was determined to keep going no matter what. A little way ahead he could see that he would soon lap the limping rabbit. Stanley could see how he was in a bad way. Probably overheated in that furry costume, he thought. Stanley slowed his pace and helped the rabbit to the next drink station, calling out encouragement each step of the way. Stanley sighed. He'd never make up the lost time now. But it was supposed to be a fun run after all, and some things were more important than winning. Steve was breathing hard now, and the stitch in his side made him gasp in pain. "Maybe I'll just sit down and take a breather," he thought. "I've got time. I'm way ahead of everyone else. No one could possibly catch up with me." Stanley thought this second lap was much longer than the first. His chest hurt every time he gasped for breath. He was sure he had blisters on his blisters. He'd heard people talking about hitting the wall. How much further, thought Stanley. He ran past several other runners. He could even see one sleeping at the side of the course. Poor chap. Must have been all too much for him, thought Stanley. But he mustn't stop. Not now. Stanley was breathing hard. His legs felt like lead weights. He could feel his muscles tightening up with cramp. It felt like an iron band was around his chest, and it was slowly tightening. His lungs hurt every time he gasped for breath. Stanley began to think he would have to give up. And it was then he saw them. His family, his friends, his training camp, his coach. There they were, a great cloud of witnesses, standing on the sidelines, waving and cheering him on. With a new burst of energy, he saw it. There it was, the finishing line. With the cheers of his friends ringing in his ears, he was there. He'd finished the race. "Well done, Stanley," said Mr. Barton. "I knew you could do it if you didn't give up." "Congratulations," he said, as he handed Stanley the winner's prize. The Bible says that being a Christian is a bit like running in a race. There will be hard times and hurting times, but Jesus wants us to fix our eyes on him, to trust him to see us through, and to never ever give up. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart.